Good Sunday morning and welcome to another edition of At Issue. I'm Matt Pritchard in for Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Coming up, how Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and her team are responding to concerns that all that empty office space could put a major dent in the city's budget in the years ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. We're going to get into it. Plus, the political newcomer who will be RFK Jr.'s running mate this fall.
But first, let's take a look back at what was at issue this last week.
Now to the latest news in former President Trump's legal battles, both civil and criminal. A judge denied his legal team's request for another delay in the hush money case involving adult film star Stormy Daniels. Separately, an appeals court reduced the bond Trump has to pay in his New York civil fraud case from more than $450 million down to $175 million.
Governor Healy announced new requirements for migrants staying at state-run emergency shelters. Starting May 1st, migrants will be required to show that they are working on getting authorized or trained to work here in the U.S. They must also show proof that they are submitting job applications, taking English classes, and searching for housing.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has picked his 2024 running mate. The independent presidential candidate says Nicole Shanahan is his choice for vice president.
Steward Healthcare is now selling its physician network. Minnesota-based Optum Financial, United Health Group subsidiary, purchased the network.
The Supreme Court heard arguments today about the abortion pill mifepristone.
And justices signaled that they may block an attempt to restrict access to it. Former Connecticut U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman has died. In a statement from his family, they say he passed away Wednesday afternoon due to complications from a fall.
1 year ago today, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested in Russia, charged with espionage.
He was on assignment when he was detained in the early stages of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, we spoke with his sister and editor at the Wall Street Journal who want to make sure he is not forgotten.
We just firmly believe that keeping Evan's name circulating and his plight prominent will make a big difference.
We have a promise from President Biden that he made personally to our family. He's going to get Evan home.
And we want to take a closer look at a piece of those headlines dealing with Robert Kennedy Jr.'s presidential run. His independent run has some supporters of President Biden and former President Trump worried that he might peel away support from either man. Now, last week, he made an interesting choice for his running mate. Nicole Shanahan is a 38-year-old attorney and philanthropist from the Bay Area. Shanahan has never run for office. She was known to some in Silicon Valley as she was married to one of the co-founders of Google, that being Sergey Brin. So a political unknown. Sue, what have you learned about her? What do you think about all this?
She's got a lot of money, Matt, and that's very important right now to the RFK race. We are in the general election time. In order to get on the ballot, RFK also needed to have a running mate in many places. So if he actually wants to win this race for president, he has to be on the ballot. So that's what this pick was all about.
And we've got more on the Kennedy selection on the latest episode of the Taking Issue podcast. You can listen on NBCBoston.com/@issue or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a number of lasting impacts, and one of those is fewer people working in downtown office buildings.
And a lot less foot traffic, which hurts retail shops, restaurants, and other businesses downtown. And that has been a problem for years. But it could be a long-term blow to the city's budget as well.
That's because much of Boston's tax revenue comes from commercial property taxes. Empty offices in downtown could lead to a drop in commercial real estate value, which in turn could cause tax revenues to fall short.
And a recent report suggests Boston could lose up to $1.4 billion in tax revenue over the next few years.
Now, the Wu administration is watching this closely and last week introduced legislation to address it. Joining us to talk all this through is Greg Maynard of the Boston Policy Institute. That group, in coordination with Tufts University, put together the report on fiscal fallout from Boston's empty offices. And Ashley Grauffenberger, the City of Boston's chief financial officer. Thanks, both of you, for being here. We sure appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's talk with you, Greg, first, and talk a little bit about different cities that have dealt with this. We know New York, San Francisco have dealt with the fallout from COVID. What makes Boston vulnerable like those cities?
So the thing that's happening in Boston is it's not that Boston has a weaker office market or retail market than those other cities. The problem is that Boston has a really unique way that it raises local revenue. So there's really three things that are unique about it. The first one is Boston is way more reliant on property taxes overall than every other big city in the country. More than 70% of the city's revenue comes from property taxes. The second piece is that Commercial property taxes represent a huge portion of that property tax revenue. So the numbers that we're using this last week is like almost 60% of the property tax revenue is from commercial property taxes. And then the third piece is that the city has become way more dependent on property tax revenue over the last 20 years. So back in the early 2000s, Boston's, the amount of the revenue they got from property taxes was only about 55%. It's now at over 70%. And that's mostly been grown on the back of the really big office boom that's happened in Boston over the last 20 years, right? Back in the early 2000s, the Seaport District hadn't been built yet. It is. It's been built now. And so now the city is dealing with this issue that the driver of its budget growth over the last 20 years is no longer going to provide that growth. And what our report shows is that the city really needs to think seriously about how it moves forward, because the solutions they had in the past are not going to work moving forward. We need to really, kind of rethink how Boston grows its budget, whether that's through budget cuts or raising residential real estate taxes, or back in the early 2000s, the state used to give a lot more aid to Boston than it does now, and so those are kind of the three places that it could potentially come from.
Well, Ashley, what's your reaction to the report and also to these ideas that we're not raising revenue in other ways that cities are?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you mentioned, this is an issue that the mayor, myself, and the city have been paying very close attention to for months now, as we've been, recovering from the COVID pandemic. And the report that Greg mentioned, it makes two key assumptions. One, that office values will fall, and two, that we will lose property tax revenue as a result of that. And I think it's really important to understand that the way property taxation works in the Commonwealth is that a decline in values does not equal a decline or a loss of revenue. But what it can impact is who is paying the share of that property tax levy. So state law allows us to increase our property tax 2.5% every year. Nothing about declining office values would impact our ability to raise that revenue year over year. But that being said, it could impact who is paying those taxes. And what the mayor introduced last week is a measure that would temporarily adjust the shift of who is bearing the burden of that tax levy to lessen the shock that it could have on residents, and allow us to really smooth in the impact of that over time. You mentioned our ability to raise other revenue. Of course, we're very limited here in the Commonwealth about what we can do locally. Greg mentioned that we have seen a decline in state aid over time, and that has led to a greater share of our budget being supported by property tax. But I think it's important to note that property tax is a very stable source of revenue for us, and we in Boston have enjoyed a AAA bond rating for the last 9 years. The rating agencies note the property tax stability as a reason for that rating. The state, as part of the Municipal Modernization Act, has put forward some ability for states, municipalities to increase the amount of local excise tax that they're raising. So, we're anxious to see how that moves forward. So there's definitely pros and cons to that. Other cities during the pandemic saw, large revenue decreases because of their mix of revenue sources that Boston didn't experience. So again, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword with property tax.
Greg, you winced a little bit when she said something about, I think, about values and taxes.
Yep.
Do you want to react to that?
Yeah, so I think what's important to note here in our report is what the report says is that there's going to be $1.5 billion shortfall in commercial property tax revenue. And so what Boston does and what the mayor's proposal is addressing is that in Boston, the commercial property tax rate is 175% of the residential property tax rate, right? So like the commercial property tax pays like $25 per thousand versus like almost $11 per thousand on the residential side. And so we're saying that like the three options that we've laid out of kind of like what the city can do is you have to rebalance that basically. And so, and what we're kind of arguing is that as a sector, the office market, the office values are just not going to be what they were in the past. You're seeing that with how these buildings are trading now. You had another building that got sold over the last week that was at like 36% less than it was sold for back in 2005, right? Like that's not going in the right direction for talking about these issues. And so, I think it's really important to just note that, like, the commercial property tax stuff that we're looking at now, you're looking at a sector that is no longer healthy versus when this proposal was put forward 20 years ago by Mayor Menino. That's when this office sector was booming, right? Back then is when, that's before the seaport was built. You had all these office buildings being built. So you had you did higher taxes on a healthy sector versus higher taxes on what's a really unhealthy sector, right?
Well, and Ashley, I want to give you a chance to respond to all of that, but also just that maybe this isn't all doom and gloom here. We have buildings that are being built and are filling up as well.
Right. I think, 2003, 2004 is a great example and exactly what we were modeling when we put forward the proposal we put forward today, last week, about really, smoothing and moderating that impact in over time. I think there are some differences from 2003, 2004. We have some bifurcation in the commercial sector. You have brand new, beautiful office buildings that are opening downtown, but you have distressed buildings as well. And I think under the proposal we put forward, if you are the owner of a distressed commercial property, you will probably still see your taxes go down year over year, but maybe just not as fast. And likewise for residents, could see your property taxes go up year over year, but again, not as fast. And so what we're really trying to do here is smooth in that impact and moderate the impact of this change for everyone.
Greg, in my experience with people I know who own office buildings and commercial property in Boston is they often go ask to have their tax rate lowered every single time. So one might make the argument that they weren't paying the amount of tax that they needed. I mean, legally it was fine. I'm not making any, but this is a process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we're looking at in the report is just that if you look at office vacancy, if you look at back to office in 2002, it was about 60%. It was about the same in 2023. And so remote work was not a thing that was happening prior to COVID, is now like a fact of life. And so, really what this report is emphasizing is not that Boston did anything wrong, right? This is part of a national, international trend. It's just that because of how Boston raises property tax revenue, it's just particularly vulnerable to this kind of dip in commercial values.
Ashley, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I do think there are challenges, and again, exactly why Mayor Wu is putting forward the measure that she put forward. Really, at the heart of this measure is protecting homeowners and protecting residents here in the city. The proposal is beneficial to those who own big apartment buildings and pass any of those increases on to their renters. So really, the heart of this is to protect residents and help kind of smooth in this new reality that we may be facing as a city.
Just quickly, the conversion idea of turning office buildings into residential, is that going to have any impact on this? And I know that's a far in the future idea, but it is something you guys are working on.
No, absolutely. And it's part of the whole suite of things that we're really doing to revitalize downtown and make sure that it's a thriving place that people want to work in, visit, live in, as on top of many other things that we're doing. The conversion program is one of those, and it won't necessarily impact this. I think, if you're moving from a distressed commercial asset to a residential building, you're being taxed differently. So again, it's really all part of the revitalization effort of downtown for us.
I think that's an important point to note is that if you do these residential conversions, so because of that difference in the residential versus commercial real estate rate, you need more than 2 square feet of residential to replace every square foot of commercial that you're losing in terms of taxable income. So as you convert these commercial buildings into residential buildings, you're actually losing an enormous amount of revenue. And then on top of that, the current program that's being offered, there's a big, they're giving them a big reduced tax rate on top of what they're already doing. So that was really the big thing that people should take away from the report, is just that the whole city in Boston and I think in Massachusetts needs to figure out how we're going to move forward in an era when we just can't rely on continuous commercial growth to fund local budgets.
Running low on time, but Ashley, yep.
I can't stress enough. I think it's really important for us to understand that when we're talking about losing revenue, it's a redistribution of who is paying the taxes. So I want to make it really clear that we are not expecting to lose $1 billion of revenue in the next couple of years. We whether or not this measure passes or not, we are still going to collect the same amount of revenue and still be able to provide the critical city services that we provide in the city. So I think it's really important to note we are really just seeking to give ourselves some runway to absorb that change.
Ashley Grafenberger and Greg Maynard, thanks so much for your time from both of you. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Well, up next, what can be done on Beacon Hill to take on food insecurity?
Leaders in that battle tell us about the impact of last year's free school meal law, plus what you and your family can do to help. Welcome back to At Issue. When Governor Healey signed the state budget into law last August, Massachusetts took a giant step toward addressing child hunger. The budget includes millions to make the universal free school meals program permanent. Part of the money for no-cost breakfast and lunch for public school students came from the millionaire's tax.
Now, that law is considered a win in the battle against hunger, but in Massachusetts, many are still struggling with food insecurity, which is defined as when people don't have enough to eat and don't know where their next meal is going to be coming from.
The federal government reports that between 2021 and 2023, the number of Bay State residents living in food insecure households increased by almost 50%.
Now, in its annual survey, the Greater Boston Food Bank found 1 in 3 adults are food insecure, and 36% of households with children surveyed say their child is food insecure. Joining us to talk about this is Catherine D'Amato, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Food Bank, and State Senator Sal DiDomenico of Everett. Thanks so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you.
Of course, let's start with Catherine and sort of just talk about how this is viewed across the Commonwealth. Do you find that a lot of people maybe aren't aware of just how pervasive a problem this is?
I would agree. The 1 in 3 number shocks people. With the pandemic over, their assumption is hunger's over, which that's not the case. And during the pandemic, we saw a significant rise, and it hasn't abated. So we're here with a very high number of need, as you saw in your pre, and then we're seeing fundraising decline because in the mind of the consumer out in the world, it's all fixed.
I wonder, how do you keep trying to grow that knowledge and that awareness? How do you take the ball from here?
Sure. Well, a couple ways. You have to speak to the audience, having opportunities like this, working with the senator on policy in the legislature and then with our federal delegation as well, just to keep trying to move it forward and educate people that it's not over.
Senator, you help lead the charge for making free school meals permanent in the state. We've seen lots of data over the years about how easy it is to do in one way, how it helps students, it makes everything easier. What are you hearing from your constituents about how the impact of the free meals is helping or not?
Yeah, no, it's been a huge win for children across the state and families. It's been a lifeline, really. During the pandemic, the federal government had the Free Meals for All program for all children across the nation. And then when they deemed the pandemic to be over, they pulled the plug on this program, which was essential for families across Massachusetts and people that I represent in Everett and Chelsea in particular. So this has been an amazing, amazing program. We know that over 100,000 new students are actually eating since 2019 because of this program, and the stigma also attached to the other piece. People always talk about food insecurity and how that benefits them in a physical way, but the mental aspect of it as well, the stigma attached to being food insecure and being deemed as different than your peers and trying to show in a public way among your friends that you have to bring a ticket or you're on some sort of assistance program does deter kids from going and getting food. So you're exacerbating the problem. You're actually making them more food insecure. And now they're going to school, and their last meal of the day could have been lunch the day prior. And they don't want to have breakfast because they don't want to go this way and their friends go that way. And so now they're not ready to learn. So we invested a tremendous amount of money into our school system through the Student Opportunity Act. And if we don't have our kids sitting at their desks ready to learn, then all that money investments that we've made have gone for naught.
I refer to this as an easy decision because the data has been supporting everything that you've been saying for as long as I can remember. But what helped make this permanent? Was it COVID that finally drove home the needs that children are having in school and the benefits from a free lunch or free meals?
Yeah, so I think that brought it to the forefront, obviously. And then when you have a benefit like this, then you take it away after several years of being in effect. Now you're taking something away from our families. And now, children and families were used to having this benefit for them and using their funds for additional ways, paying rent, paying for food for their home, medical expenses. So every little amount that they can save is a beneficial thing for the family. So, but for me, I focus a lot on children and families. And when I saw this opportunity of extending the program, we jumped on it quick because we knew how important this was. And the Greater Boston Food Bank and other partners have been essential in that work.
Catherine, I wonder if you have any perspective on that question.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's an awesome step. 13th state, I think, Senator, that has done this and stepped forward to make this happen. And it creates a baseline for families. I think the Senator said it very well, that families can have food security for their children now and not be wondering whether can they afford to make the breakfast, can they afford to get the lunch. And the stigma piece and the shame is a very important part of what kept children from going to get the meal. Now, it's going to take a few years for us to know what that impact is, but this policy is a critical baseline to move Massachusetts toward being a food secure state.
Very good. Yeah, I know we've talked about a state office of food security as well, Senator. I guess, what do you sort of see this as playing a role in this entire process?
Yeah, integration, collaboration, and making sure all parties come together. To fight food insecurity, it's a holistic, endeavor. Mm-hmm. If we do a piecemeal and do one thing here, one thing there, we're only scratching the surface of solving the problem. We need a leader that's going to bring it all together under one roof and actually do a comprehensive assessment of what it needs to eradicate, food insecurity. Right. And we know that this one person, if we can get this across the finish line, will be that person to bring all the parties together. So, we do a lot of things pretty good in state government. I think that we provide a lot of benefits for folks, but sometimes this fragmented approach isn't always benefiting the last consumers.
What exact steps do you think that they would take, I guess, if they were in this role?
Well, the role is new.
Yeah.
Right? Right. And so it's a brand new, we've seen it in other governments, other states. But what it does do is, just as the Senator noted, it requires the state government work to happen. There's a lot of entities. An example, and you could speak to this better than I. Elders are over here, kids are over there, food insecurity is over here. Ag, I'm not sure where ag is. Yep. And so there's a variety of programs happening. So just to begin with, this person becomes an internal advocate to assess what's happening. And that's going to help us, again, marshal forward in a more constructive way.
What is one thing you'd like people at home to take away from this? The COVID era benefits are rolling back. We keep hearing in the news about how much food we waste, just in general, even in places where folks are strapped for food. What would you like folks at home right now to take away from our conversation today?
We have the power to end hunger. We have the power to feed children. We have it. It's just that we have to do it. So for me, it's don't be indifferent and act. And if you have a heart to be able to give a little or volunteer, then get involved. Because if we are able to make Massachusetts food secure, that's about productivity. That's about children's brains growing in the right way. That's about residents who want to stay here and can stay here. This is a huge step forward if we take care of the food.
Senator?
Yeah, and I would just add, President Biden has an initiative for a national program to eradicate hunger. Catherine and I were there with some folks from Massachusetts, and everything the president was talking about, we've either done or in the process of doing.
Correct.
So our state is ahead of the curve when it comes to fighting food insecurity, but we need people's help. We need advocacy on the ground. And some people, it might not affect them today, but it could affect them tomorrow. And a lot of people that we help at the State House tell us they never would have thought they'd find themselves in this kind of position, asking for help, asking for help for their children and their families, and making tough choices at home because of that. So food insecurity is, if we can chip away at this and get this done, and there's a lot of ways we can do it, and we're very confident we have great partners that are doing it and letting us tell the public how important this is, and the pandemic for some is not over.
Appreciate both of you coming in, talking about this critical topic with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Well, that is all the time we have for this issue of At Issue. Coming up next Sunday, a closer look at the chaos in Haiti. Lawlessness, no functioning government, and gangs running amok. We're going to speak with local Haitians working to help family and friends who are stranded there.
Plus, helping teens with mental health challenges. A closer look at the massive new effort by the City of Boston to address teens' behavioral health needs.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Pritchard.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Happy Easter. If you're celebrating, enjoy the day.